Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca, and I lead Endeavor Miami's growth programs. And I'm super excited to be here with you guys today to talk about a very important topic finding sustainable solutions here in South Florida. So, I'm going to be moderating today's conversation, and I would like to bring to the stage our panelists for the day. So, welcome, Daniel. Welcome, Richard.
Hello,
Hello.
hello.
Nice. All right, so I'm going to do a brief intro and turn it to you guys. So, Richard is actually an Endeavor entrepreneur with ecosystems, and I'm super excited to have him today. And Daniel is founder and CEO of Seaworthy and a very good friend of mine. We're personal friends from when he first moved to Miami, so it's been awesome seeing his journey since then. So, why don't we do some quick intros first? Richard, I'll turn to you. Who's Richard? What's ecosystems? What's your story?
So yes, Richard Lamondin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Ecosystems, Miami native. We do exist, but started Ecosystems back in 2012, basically with a mission to prove that conservation is good for business. What that means in practice is that we operate as the outsourced sustainability departments for big private equity companies in the real estate industry. So basically, we work with them all the way from setting up their sustainability strategy to implementing it with our in-house teams to doing their impact reporting in-house. And as a result, we've saved over 5 billion gallons of fresh water, about $51 million in utility costs, and 140,000 metric tons of CO2 and counting. And that's us.
Incredible, incredible. Daniel, I'll turn to you now.
Sure thing. Well, as Rebecca said, we met all the way back in fall of 2020 when I joined Global Shapers alongside her. And that was also when I launched Seaworthy Collective, which we are a startup community and venture studio driving regenerative ocean and climate impact. And so long story short, I'm a recovering marine roboticist who saw really just these major barriers to doing ocean innovation for positive impact. And here in Miami, we just saw those barriers not being applicable, so that we could actually create an accessible opportunity to not only co-create but also grow startups, creating not only ocean but also climate impact in parallel.
Beautiful. Well, thank you both for introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit more about your story. We're going to do a deep dive in that in just a second. So let's get started with the conversation, right? So we're going to be talking about finding sustainable solutions through Climatetech, and having you guys share your experience as founders in the space. So this is a very important topic that directly impacts Miami, of course, as we know. Actually, let me read a piece of information for you. So according to the South Florida Regional Climate Change Compact, it's estimated that we'll have a sea level rise of 6 to 10 additional inches of water by 2030. And our drainage system actually becomes useless with just 6 inches. And 1/10 of Miami-Dade County landmass is less than a foot above sea level, which means we are in deep trouble. So, Daniel, why don't we start with you? Why don't you tell us your story and the work that Seaworthy does, and why is it so crucial for us to speed up solutions related to clean tech and climate tech, and especially you doing your work with ocean tech as well?
Well, first, I love to offer perspective. Sustainability is a word that is used a lot, and ultimately, people don't even necessarily understand what it means, right? And it really means to basically do as much good as we do harm, right? Net zero. And the reality is, while that might have been something idealistic 20 years ago, we're well past that point, especially when we talk about the oceans and the oncoming effects of climate change and more. And so what we see at Seaworthy is really the opportunity to be regenerative, which means going beyond sustainability to actually solve problems rather than just mitigate them. So net positive rather than net zero. And so with Seaworthy, really for us, it started with understanding what are these barriers to innovation. In the ocean space, it's been a lack of public funding. It's the fact that the private sector is really duopolized between fossil fuels and defense. And I say that from personal experience. And even in academia, the pace of innovation just isn't fast enough, with there being tunnel vision to research and public sector, and a very much lack of innovation and entrepreneurship. And so from all these different fronts, before we even talk about solving these big problems like overfishing, plastic pollution, climate change, and sea level rise, it's really about where are the accessible opportunities to do the work in the first place. And so, the quote unquote disruptive thing we've done at Seaworthy is just say, hey, here's a way that we can all come together and start co-creating startups. We're the first ocean and climate impact venture studio, and really just saying, if we can create these opportunities for, a few trailblazing entrepreneurs and people that may not have ever been the typical entrepreneur in this space, just imagine the path we can blaze for so many beyond that.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing. Richard, why don't you turn us a little bit to ecosystems? Why you started this company? What has been the journey and the struggles you've seen or you've lived through, and where you guys are at today?
Well, first of all, I totally agree with what Daniel said around net zero is like, would have been nice 20 years ago, basically. We take a different approach early on. So we started in 2012, almost 10 years ago now, where back then, quite frankly, there wasn't as much emphasis on this type of work. And so from the beginning, I think it's important to know that we're still a bootstrap company, meaning we have no outside investors, although if something like Seaworthy existed, who knows if that would have been the case. But, for us, our focus has always been on driving adoption through marrying private benefit with public benefit. So for example, in our early days, we were a water conservation company purely, and our focus was making sure that, particularly here in South Florida, where saltwater intrusion is a major concern, we were able to, the best defense against that, other than reducing sea level rise, is more fresh water in the aquifer, right? So that the salt water isn't displacing the fresh water. And so our focus became, okay, how can we increase our freshwater supply? Believe it or not, early age of ecosystems, that was through stuff like toilets, in which EPA said that 20% of all of them are leaking, and that US homes waste 1 trillion gallons of water a year just in leaks, right? And so we decided to focus on the problem from a granular perspective, and that is sort of embedded in our DNA. Over the years, we've added energy conservation. Like I said at the top, we now are basically operating as an outsourced sustainability department. But at our essence, we are an organization that is constantly trying to get businesses into the climate fight through ways that they are also winning on their bottom lines. It's not always possible, but that is the niche that we play. And it's kind of an all of the above approach between all of the different strategies. There's really no wrong strategy here, given the scale of the challenge we are facing, in my opinion.
So Richard, I'll still keep talking to you now, and then I'll go back to Daniel. You've been building ecosystems for so many years. Can you tell us a little bit more about what were the challenges or have been the challenges in scaling your company in this vertical? I mean, Daniel alluded to issues with academia and maybe even education of the consumer, politics. Can you walk us through how that experience was like for you? And then I'll turn to Daniel and ask something for that.
Well, first of all, I've never been accused of being a robotic anything. So yeah, let's just start with the fact that most of what I've learned has been through hard experience and YouTube, basically. But for us, the major challenges we faced, most of them were very similar to the ones that many early stage companies faced 10 years ago in Miami, which was a lack of infrastructure, a lack of support. I mean, that's old news. A lot of that has changed now. Additionally, from the sense of good news, climate related issues were not at the forefront at all. I remember in 2013, California had this epic drought, and that was like the first time people started to pay attention to us. But we spent years. I mean, we didn't really hit what Endeavor calls the inflection point until 2016, 2017. So we, from 2012 to 2016, 2017, were a tiny bootstrap mom and pop operation, just trying to educate people, just trying to make people give us a shot at what we were talking about. And so the challenges we faced was really just getting buy-in. And that is why, we shied away. We are in Florida. Quite frankly, while South Florida is a bit more focused on this issue, anything that has to do with Tallahassee is pretty much a headwind for a climate business here. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, later. But for us, because of the lack of, let's say, opportunity from rebates and incentives and government support, we built the organization entirely focused on what can we achieve outside of that framework. What isn't going to require, like solar does, like rebates and things like that. And so I think that was a painful process, but it ultimately made us stronger in the long run because it made us less dependent upon the whims of a political leader, so to speak. But for the most part, I would say most of those challenges have improved. I'd also say it's probably one of the better times to start a company in the climate space than it's ever been. on the flip side. So, but in our experience, those are the major challenges.
Thank you. No, I made some notes here to come back in a second, but Daniel, I wanted to switch gears to you. You've had a very interesting experience with Seaworthy, launching it a little over like a year and something ago. You've really been, and I'm sure I can speak on behalf of a lot of people in the community, really disrupting the space in terms of the attention that you're giving to the blue economy and this kind of technology, right? And showing that it is important and we have to be talking more about it. And there's not enough, to what Richard alluded to, the infrastructure, right? To take this to the level that we need to save our planet, basically. So can you talk to us a little bit about what has been a journey in growing Seaworthy? What have been some of those growing pains in relation to what South Florida has been able to provide or not provide? And what is your kind of like, where are you guys at right now?
Yeah, so, first off, I just want to say what Richard mentioned very much resonated with me as far as, the need to go outside the existing system. I very much operate with Seaworthy at both the systems level, but also on the macro level, or micro level rather, where it's, how do we actually initiate systems change and actually create something that, obviously the government isn't going to support, right? And so we look at COP26, what the world leaders came together for climate change legislation, and arguably the overall, overall takeaway from that was underwhelming, to say the least, right? It's so much on us as innovators and entrepreneurs to pick up where they're, leaving behind. And so for Seaworthy ourselves, it's, I love to say Miami is, a symptom of the larger system. While on one hand, we have the greatest problem to solve, it's also the greatest opportunity. One thing that I love to say for Seaworthy is that, here in Miami, we have the one corner of the country, sorry, over my head. We have the one corner of the country where these entrenched interests in defense of fossil fuels don't really have a footing. And so while on one hand, our ecosystem is very underdeveloped, on the other hand, it's really an opportunity for building it right. And so all that to be said, there's really this opportunity where, when we talk about building an ecosystem, right, it's about bringing together the people that, and building the community really that is doing this for the right reasons and pursuing it with the intent of impact. And I'll just briefly brush on Web3 because this is a huge rabbit hole, but what I get excited about actually, and I know as far as some of the problem, and then I'll go to the opportunity, is the problem has been ecosystem support. And where I talk about where we're at right now is we've been on this journey of saying, everyone wants to support the individual solutions, but how do we actually build the ecosystem? And when I look at Web3, it's really this mechanism that's saying, hey, we can actually democratize community support and find ways to actually take community engagement and turn that into real ecosystem support. And beyond that, really creating mechanisms that can actually enable return on impact, basically. And that's a whole nother discussion. But all that to be said, I think even just echoing Richard's original point, what we're all building here is something that is still a nascent ecosystem, and those are still a lot of the challenges. A lot of the funding is still yet to be made yet. We're seeing ESG really evolve, but it's still nascent in early days. And so how do we make sure that we're building something that actually has lasting impact and is scalable and not just, a solution solving a small problem?
Before you continue, I want to say, you mentioned ESG. That is like one of those tailwinds I was mentioning. For those who don't know what that means, it means environmental social governance. And basically, it's starting at the publicly traded companies right now, like Blackstone's one of our customers, and they're driven by ESG. And basically, more and more companies are tying executive compensation and different benchmarks to different impacts they make on the environment, social issues, et cetera. So those three letters, a lot of people I know don't know, but it's three big letters for this movement and new entrepreneurs as well in this space.
So I wanted to ask you both, like, why do you think we're still struggling to see founders in this space, number one? Number two, we've talked a little bit about the barriers already, but what do you think has to be done in order to remove these barriers? And I'll just do a side comment, like Richard, you mentioned, like building ecosystems outside of the framework, and kind of like, and then Daniel said building the whole thing from the ground up. So as we remove these barriers, what is the infrastructure that has to exist so these companies can scale? Do we need one at all? Or like, what are the things we can be doing to propel the growth of these new opportunities?
He works with early stage more than me, so I'll kick it off to you, Daniel.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you just hit the nail on the head. It really has to start from early stage, right? I love to kind of call out climate VCs a little bit who say, we're launching a fund, and it's like, great, where are these solutions going to come from? Are you just going to import them from Silicon Valley? No, we need to build them here, right? And so, when we talk about that, it's really this organic grassroots piece, which starts with, building a community, demystifying the barriers. I love to say, for specifically ocean and climate impact combined, you don't need a marine science degree or PhD to do the work, right? These are businesses. You need a technical expert, sure, but it's not all technical experts. And then beyond that, really, when we talk about early stage support, I mean, coming from my last year and a half, I mean, it's a brutal ecosystem, but somebody's got to do it, and we'll never get to those big. They actually, by the way, we don't call them in the climate tech space. We don't really go for unicorns as much as gigacorns, which are taking out gigatons of carbon, right? But really, when we talk about how we're going to build this ecosystem, it has to start with the community and educating people on the opportunity and making it accessible. And we're really passionate about that at Seaworthy, and really, Richard, I'm glad that you can immediately pinpoint this is the pain point. So throw it back to you now.
For sure. And I think grassroots is absolutely important. I actually would take it the other direction, which is I've been building here for 10 years, and I could say with 100% degree of certainty, I am not aware of a broad regional vision to make Miami this at all. I've seen some rumblings very recently. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, I was going to say, well, breaking news. I was just on a on a blue-green tech roundtable at the county yesterday. So there is momentum happening slowly but surely. So
it's probably because I've been saying things like this for a while. Hopefully that.
Hey, you just gotta make noise.
In public. Shame on you.
So that's fantastic. That's exactly kind of my point. Is a sense of like, it's almost the vision should have, quite frankly, been in place quite some time ago. I think county leadership has changed to become more friendly towards this from a political standpoint. But I think a vision, and then we're here in Miami very good at visions. I'd say it has to be backed by tangible action, right? And so that would be the next thing I said. Is I'm born and raised here, so I've seen the waves of things that have come at this point, and I think it's totally possible. One great example of a great political program that hasn't panned out is we passed the Miami Forever bond. I don't want to say 2017, 2018. It's a $400 million bond. I think we've only spent like 20 or 25 million. Don't quote me on these numbers, but it's like one of those areas where there's political will. There's people kind of want this thing to happen. They voted to take out a bond from the city, but where is that going? Where's the vision for where those resources go? I mean, I could think of some great ideas for that, quite frankly.
Well, and just to finish echoing your point, there's a lot of great PR, but doesn't really mean much until there's money behind it. At this point, Richard, to both of the credit of our work, we can be doing the labor of building the ecosystem, but it isn't going to grow unless there's really, much larger scale support. So,
absolutely.
I'll stop there before I get full rant.
No, but these are all super valid points. So we touched a little bit on politics. It's getting better. We touched on the education piece that Seaworthy does. Do you think that there's an element of like people just don't know better, or like what are the opportunities of what can be built, or like do you think that people still just don't care at all about the topic, and that's why we don't see more of it, or perhaps people don't see the profit aspect of it, which is dumb because it's still a business that can scale and be profitable. What else do you think is missing that maybe the community builders in South Florida can be focusing on moving forward? I'll throw it to both of you.
Yeah, I'll jump in first. Really, I do get back to everyone, and actually I'll connect back to a specific instance. So they had the TEDx Salon on donut economics, which if you haven't checked out donut economics, highly recommend to anyone watching. Basically, it outlines the regenerative economy that we're working towards. But really, people get so caught up in the problem. And there was a woman at this TEDx Salon that literally used the toilet paper shortage during the pandemic as like an example of why we're not ready for take on climate change. But the reality is just that, until we actually start seeing it as an opportunity and realize there's a path not only to make impact, which a lot of people are passionate about, but also make business, right? This is actually the most lucrative opportunity in our lifetimes as these mechanisms and as these evolving ecosystems really develop. And the more people see that as an opportunity and less just this overwhelming existential crisis, the sooner we can actually start turning the tide, and not only turning the tide, but making real money doing it too.
I was going to say something similar, like more examples to emulate, right? I mean, what for people motivated, let's say more by financial and less by mission, I think that a lot of times a big success story can always make people see what's possible. I mean, it could also be like person who breaks a world record in sprinting, then the next one's broken a year later. What's possible, right? So I think more examples come from, instead of building a better ecosystem, more, I think, scaling companies in this space. Here, I think we'll continue to demonstrate more and more of the viability of this. But I think in terms of, even more importantly, when we talk about vision, to me, it doesn't make sense how we haven't become that center already, simply because we're the front line on climate change. I mean, and Miami is a place where we should be trying everything and anything, right? Like, what do we have to lose, honestly? Our homes, kind of. But so I think that really anyone excited about a frontier, like you mentioned, Web3 is definitely one, but I think climate is absolutely another one. It's some of these technologies are so nascent.
Well, if you want to go down that rabbit hole a little bit, Klima,
Sure.
Klima DAO, they're doing basically working on upping the price of carbon credits by collectively buying them up. Another one that actually just met with last week at Ultramarine, Diatom DAO, they're creating basically a plastic credit token. So we're actually already seeing now these collectives come together through Web3 to create these economic drivers for impact. And so we're working to connect the dots somewhat on what we're working at Seaworthy with them. But all that to be said, there is this big movement of crypto and climate as a real use case. And that's what really has me excited for the future of Miami Tech, because right now NFTs are cool, but like the utility piece is the most important piece. And if we can link it to real world impact, now we're really talking.
And I think one other thing that may be, you talk about demystifying barriers. You talk about you don't have to be a scientist. Like, for example, I know very little before we got into this about what we are doing now. I just knew I wanted to like make an impact on the environment. I grew up on the water. I mean, I grew up here, so I think that was an excellent point too in terms of that. There's also two different ways on the climate front. There's the inventors, right? Let's say something. Let's just use a solar panel. Someone invented solar panel and someone's improving them. Someone else has to deploy them at nationwide scale. Usually these are not the same people, right? And so I think when we talk about this space and technology, so for example, for us, we're the deployers. We're the people who get widespread adoption from some of the largest apartment owners in the country, hotel owners, et cetera. So, understanding that it's, that side of this fight is just as important as actually inventing the technology. And there's tons of opportunity here.
I second everything that you guys said. I think that it's kind of shocking how Miami, South Florida, it's not as concerned that they should be with the fact that we might be underwater in just a couple of decades. But I think that you brought a really good point, and I think Daniel alluded that a few minutes ago. We don't have to be necessarily all inventors or engineers or biologists to be able to get into this space. I mean, how many people create startups because it's a pain point that they live through, but it's not necessarily something that they built their careers on. So I think for everyone watching, you can build a company tackling climate change if you want, and you don't have to be an expert in it to do it. You guys also mentioned a little bit of politics, right? How that's moving forward. Seaworthy doing the work on education. I wanted to take a second to talk a little bit more on the community building piece, right? Because that's where Endeavor comes in. So for those that are watching that might not know us, Endeavor is a global organization that helps founders scale up their companies. And we look for founders that are leading innovative companies that have a strong scalability potential, and we provide services and community to help them grow. So right now we have a program that is going to start in March. Applications close this Sunday, so for those watching, for Climatetech and clean tech startups. And the idea is to really build this awesome cohort of founders that are leading the charge of innovative solutions all across South Florida that need to understand or would like more help understanding how they can scale that further, right? So as we talk about the politics piece, education piece, and the community building piece, I feel like there are some strides this year, hopefully, to move things forward. I guess I would just, since we're close to the end now, I wanted to turn to you guys and ask, first of all, what's your perspective on capital? Do you think capital is necessarily a big barrier right now that has to be broken in order for us to propel these types of technology forward? Number one. And no, let's go with that first, because I forgot my second question. So let's start with that one.
Well, the contrarian perspective I always have is that capital is a tool, right? So a lot of ideas need it to get off the ground quickly. Some people have a tolerance for multiple years of no income pain, like me early in my 20s, where we could bootstrap our way to viability. So I think it really is founder and mission dependent. Capital will definitely get you there quicker. You may not have a stronger foundation at the end, but it's absolutely a tool in the hands of whoever is trying to utilize it.
And I'll jump in because I know Mayor Suarez loves to say Miami is becoming the capital of capital. And what I love to say is there's actually 8 forms of capital. And I'm not going to go through the whole list, but basically that beyond just financial capital, there's the value of social capital and relationships and networks, individual capital and personal development, intellectual capital and the value of knowledge, of opportunities and innovation. And so when we think about all these elements that make up growing a community and an ecosystem, it has to be more than just financial. I said earlier, a VC fund landing here in Climatetech doesn't mean shit. Doesn't mean anything unless we actually have the ecosystem to support it. Otherwise, we're just importing startups, and we need to home grow them. And so that's really what we're passionate about, is if we can actually have these resources here to empower our community, it's going to make a huge difference.
I hope you weren't expecting like intense debate, because I keep agreeing with everything you said. So.
Oh yeah, no, we're all jaded here.
No, and I think that's what we've been talking. If you stop to think about it, ecosystems is a homegrown success story. Seaworthy is being built in Miami. Our office is completely focused in South Florida, and the program we have is for local startups. So I agree with you. We have the potential here. We just need to start focusing on them. And most importantly, ecosystems bootstrapped, and Seaworthy is building amazing stuff with the resources that are available. And it goes to show, for those watching, you don't need financial money to make things grow. So, okay, we're now almost on time. I want to turn to you guys and just say and ask, what is it that you want to share with the community, right? Those maybe thinking and getting into the space, or those that are trying to understand what can be done about it. What message do you want to get across to everybody?
Good.
Okay. For Seaworthy, first off, our community is always open. If you go to our website, you can join our Discord. We're going to be announcing our next panel shortly. But we just closed our applications for our next cohort ourselves, and we're excited to hopefully help feed the pipeline for Endeavor's new Climatetech Accelerator as well. To your point earlier, Richard, we need to build the ecosystem from early stage to later stage, and I'm really happy to see some of the later stage ecosystem being built with Endeavor. But on our end, really, it's just about, don't be afraid to seek out opportunities. They are accessible. We are working to make sure that, whether it's being educated on the field or having the opportunity to co-found a startup or grow your early stage startup, we're here for you guys, and feel free to reach out.
For me, first of all, I didn't get here alone. My brother is a rock star co-founder. He just makes me do all the interviews and such. But for us, when I speak with folks in the early stage, I kind of have the same 3 pieces of advice. One is that unless there's some kind of government or external funding source that you're planning on utilizing, there has to be a compelling economic argument for the solution. If there's adoption that is not within grants or other funding sources, it has to solve an actual problem. I see a lot of solutions that we end up vetting that are actually solving the problems that they claim to be solving. And the last piece is, for us, what has made us get to where we are is finding a strong niche, right? I mean, we could be deploying our services in a lot of different industries, but we found one in the apartment industry that was severely underserved, and one that we felt we could drive impact very quickly. And that's why we quickly scaled outside of Miami in terms of where our focus went. And so those 3 things are sort of the 3 things that I feel like got us to where we are today.
No, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing. Thank you both. I think this has been an awesome conversation. I think we touched on government and strides there, the education piece, the capital piece. Growing a company in this space is just like growing a company in any other space. You don't need to be an expert to be able to jump into this. But our community still needs to give more attention and do attention to this topic, because we're going to be underwater in a few decades. So on that note.
Well, we don't have to be. That's the point.
Thank you for correcting me. We don't have to be. We don't have to be. And hopefully with 2022 coming along, we have more people putting attention and creating new ideas that we can all back.
Well, I even love to say we don't even have to, all the technology already exists. It's just getting past these barriers of implementation and starting to get them out there. So we need more founders in this space, bottom line.
Agreed. Happy to talk to any in the early stage too. I don't have the early stage experience of Daniel, but I always tell every year I'm involved in the Endeavor Labs, some form or another. So
yeah, we're all here to help each other.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, thank you both for spending this 30 minutes with me this afternoon on a cloudy Friday. But thank you for everything you shared. I hope that for those of you watching, you're leaving a little bit more inspired to make change in our community. And applications are still open until Sunday. So if you know folks that are interested in understanding how to scale their companies, please send them this live, because I think there will be a link to apply around here. And yeah, thank you guys so much. Okay, really.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you, Rebecca. Great meeting you, Richard.
Great meeting you as well.